It is the night before Thanksgiving, 1971. Somewhere over the black forests of Washington state, a door opens at the back of a passenger jet, in mid-flight. Freezing air screams into the cabin, and a man in a business suit steps out into the darkness, with $200,000 strapped to his body. No one ever sees him again. No body, no parachute, no real name. More than 50 years later, the FBI still doesn't know who he was, or whether he survived the fall. It's the only unsolved skyjacking in American history, and it all begins with a quiet man and a folded note. He bought a one-way ticket at the counter in Portland, Oregon, and gave the name Dan Cooper. He was a man in his mid-40s, dark suit, white shirt, a thin black tie, a raincoat folded over his arm. He carried a briefcase. He was, by every account, completely unremarkable. He took his seat near the back of the plane, ordered a bourbon and soda, and lit a cigarette. The flight attendants barely registered him. He was polite. He was calm. He paid in cash. Nobody on board had any reason to look at him twice, and that, it seems, was exactly what he wanted. Shortly after takeoff, he handed a folded note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was a lonely businessman slipping her his phone number, and she tucked it away without reading it. He leaned toward her and said quietly, "You'd better look at that note." She unfolded it. In neat handwriting, it said he had a bomb. He opened the briefcase just enough for her to see inside, a tangle of wires and red cylinders that looked like sticks of dynamite. Then he told her very calmly what he wanted. His demands were specific: $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft the moment it landed. The plane circled over Puget Sound for nearly 2 hours while, on the ground, the FBI and the airline scrambled to gather the cash and the chutes. Through all of it, the passengers had no idea anything was wrong. Cooper sat quietly, sipping his drink. When the plane finally touched down in Seattle, he kept his word. All 36 passengers were allowed to walk off, free, into the terminal. He kept only a handful of crew, and the money. With the cash and parachutes aboard, Cooper gave his final instructions. Fly south, toward Mexico City. Stay low, under 10,000 feet. Stay slow. Landing gear down, wing flaps lowered, cabin left unpressurized. He knew this aircraft. The Boeing 727 had a rear staircase that folded down beneath the tail, and almost uniquely, it could be lowered in flight. He sent the last flight attendant up to the cockpit, told the crew to stay behind the curtain, and he was alone in the back of the plane. Outside, it was raining. It was near freezing, and it was completely dark. At around 8:13 that night, the crew up front felt it. A sudden change in pressure, a small bump, as if the balance of the aircraft had shifted. Below them was the wilderness of southwestern Washington, near the Lewis River, close to a tiny place called Ariel. Cooper had walked down the rear stairs into the slipstream, into the roaring, freezing black, and stepped off. That bump was the last trace of him anyone would ever feel. When the plane landed in Reno, Nevada, the rear staircase was hanging open, and the cabin was empty. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in FBI history. They gave it a case name, NORJAC, for Northwest Hijacking. Agents combed the forests below the flight path for weeks. They searched on foot, from helicopters, from the air. At one point, the Air Force even loaned them an SR-71 spy plane to photograph the terrain. They found nothing. No body, no parachute, no money. The man had simply dissolved into the night, and the press, mishearing an early suspect's name, started calling him D.B. Cooper. The name stuck. The man never reappeared. He didn't leave much. On the seat where he'd been sitting, agents found a cheap black clip-on tie, the kind you could buy for about $1.50, along with a small mother-of-pearl tie clip, a single hair on the headrest, and 8 cigarette butts in the armrest ashtray. That was it. A man pulls off the most famous heist in aviation history and leaves behind a $1.50 tie and the stub of a cigarette. For decades, those scraps were almost everything investigators had. And then, 9 years later, the river gave something back. In February 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was building a campfire with his family on a sandy bank of the Columbia River. a place called Tina Bar. Digging in the sand, he uncovered 3 weathered bundles of cash, soft, rotting, falling apart at the edges. $5,800 in $20 bills. The FBI checked the serial numbers. They matched the ransom. Exactly. It was the first, and to this day the only, piece of Cooper's money ever recovered, which left a haunting question. Where was the other $194,000? And where was the man? Here is the theory that has gripped people for 50 years. The dark one. That Cooper was no desperate amateur, but a cold, calculating professional. A man who studied the aircraft, timed the jump, and pulled off the perfect crime, then slipped into an ordinary life and watched the legend grow from his living room. The strongest name attached to this version is Richard McCoy II, a Vietnam veteran and skilled paratrooper who, just months later, hijacked a plane in almost the exact same way. His own children have come forward, claiming a parachute in the family's belongings matched Cooper's. A ruthless mind, a flawless escape, a man who got away with it completely. Skeptical, grounded, except the details don't behave like a professional's. A trained jumper wouldn't have done what Cooper did. He took a parachute that couldn't be steered. One of the reserve chutes he was handed was a sewn-shut training dummy that couldn't open at all, and a real expert would have checked. He jumped at night, in a rainstorm, into mountains he couldn't see, wearing a business suit and slip-on loafers. No helmet, no jumpsuit, no boots. That isn't the checklist of a master criminal. That's a gamble made by someone who didn't fully grasp how lethal that jump would be. And as for McCoy, the FBI has tested the evidence for decades, including DNA from the tie. It has never produced a match. To this day, it proves nothing. So here is what the people closest to the case came to believe. The agent who chased Cooper the longest concluded simply that the man did not survive. Think about the conditions. 20-degree wind chill, a 200-mile-an-hour slipstream, total darkness, and miles of freezing forest below. And think about that money on the riverbank, found years later, soft and worn, far from the suspected landing zone. To many investigators, that looks less like a man who spent his fortune, and more like cash that tumbled down a river on its own, while its owner never made it out of the woods. The most active modern lead still points toward McCoy, but more than 50 years on, the science has never closed the door, or opened it, and that's where it rests. We don't know if Cooper drifted to his death in the dark that night, or walked out of those woods, changed his name, and lived to be an old man. We don't know if he was a paratrooper, a con man, or just a desperate stranger who got lucky once and unlucky forever. We have a $1.50 tie, a handful of rotting bills, and a single pressure bump in the night 50 years ago. The truth stepped off the back of that plane into the rain, and the rain kept it secret. We'll likely never truly know. If this case stayed with you, it was meant to. Some doors close. This one is still hanging open. This has been The Vanished Files, a new case every week. Stay curious, and stay safe out there.